All right, good afternoon. So today we're going to be talking about social psychology. Social psychology is very different from any of the other chapters that we've covered. In all of the other chapters, we were looking at the individual specifically. In this unit, we're looking at how individuals relate to other people in society or a social setting. So you want to make sure you keep your notes from this unit. When you take sociology, a lot of these terms will overlap. All right, so we have we have three different topics in this particular chapter. We have social thinking or social cognition, so how we think about others, social influence, how we're influenced by others, and then how we relate to one another, so social relations. All right, so let's start off with social thinking. All right, the first term we looked at is called attribution theory. So attribution theory would say that sometimes whenever someone does something, and that's just in our nature, we try to explain or figure out why people act the way they do. But oftentimes, if somebody does something, we tend to either say it was their disposition that caused them to do that. So, like their character, it's just how they are. Or is it the situation that they were in that caused them to do something? So, I give you the example in class. Let's say you're walking down the hallway and your friend passes you and you wave and they don't wave back. They just kind of stare off into space and keep going. You can explain that behavior in two ways. One, you can say, wow, my friend's a jerk, and that's accrediting their disposition. Or you can say, maybe something happened to them this morning and they didn't even notice me. So it was the situation that caused it. You could be out at a restaurant and let's say the waitress isn't very attentive. So you're sitting there, you have an empty drink, she's not coming back to see if you need anything after you get your food, etc. You can say, wow, she's a bad waitress. That would be her disposition. Or you can say, well, maybe they're very busy or they're short-staffed. So it's the situation that is causing that behavior. Now, whenever someone does something and it's negative, we automatically just tend to credit their disposition. And this is known as the fundamental attribution error. So the book talks about, you see a homeless person, some people are just quick to say, they're just lazy. They don't want a job. That's saying it's their disposition. And it's hard to be objective sometimes and take a step back and try to put yourself in their place. Maybe something terrible has happened in their life, and that's what led them to be homeless. If it's something bad and someone else does something, we just simply tend to focus on their disposition. It's just how they are. It's their character. The opposite is true for ourselves. If we do something bad, we tend to blame the situation. We're not bad people. The situation caused us to do something negative. All right. The next thing we looked at in this unit was attitudes. Our attitudes are feelings that we have towards different people or objects or events. And our attitudes about people and things that we encounter, they're shaped by a variety of different outlets. Okay, so our attitudes are shaped by family, friends. They can be shaped by our teachers. It can be from the media. So there are a variety of different areas that influence how we feel about other people, other events. All right, so with that said, talking about attitudes, we looked at social roles. So a role is how you play, how you act in a particular situation. And we all have these ideas about how we should act when we are in a certain position. We have ideas about how maybe a principal should act, how a physician should act, how a police officer should act. And we have certain expectations about how we ourselves should act when we're placed in a particular role. So, looking at attitudes and social roles, the next person we need to look at is one of the most famous social psychologists, and his name is Philip Zimbardo. So, he conducted a study to see if good people put in a bad situation could become cruel to others. Okay, so his study was kind of led by, right after the trials of the Nazis from World War II, putting in charge of the Jewish people in the death camps and all the terrible things that they did. He wondered, were they all just bad people? Were they all evil people? Or were they just average people put into a role of authority without clear instructions and became cruel to others? So he wanted to test that. So he created a mock prison at Stanford University. So this is the Stanford University prison study. And he had this mock jail in the basement. And while the students went on break, he had some of them volunteer. He chose some of them to be the inmates who would stay there around the clock. And he chose others to be prison guards. And they could go home after their 8-hour shift. So it was pretty much run like a regular jail. Now, he told the prison guards, okay, this is the agenda. This is what the inmates need to do. Okay, this is when they go eat. This is when they go outside. All the things they had to do, and you need to make them comply. And they never really gave them any more instruction. So it was supposed to run for 2 weeks. Well, after the first day, again, these are college students on break. So the inmates, said, I don't feel like going to lunch now. I don't want to go outside. I just want to stay in my, cell and chill. Well, the guards, felt offended as if, they were doing something wrong and they were supposed to get them to comply. So they started, treating these inmates very cruelly. They were taking their mattress from them. They were putting them in solitary confinement. They sprayed them with a fire extinguisher, did all these horrible things. The prison guards, and these are just average, college students, they became very, very oppressive towards the inmates. They actually had to shut it down after about 5 days because they just became too harsh. So I have a picture up here of the Abu Ghraib prison scandal. That would have been in the early 2000s. It was a prison that was housing suspected terrorists. And so instead of trained military being in charge of them, they put National Guard, who are just pretty much average people, right? So National Guard are put in charge of these terrorists, and they're just told to get them to talk, but no clear guidelines on how to do that. And again, these average people became very oppressive. They were doing things like in the picture there, they're putting the prisoners on these boxes hooked up to electrical wires and water on the floor. And they were told, if you fall off, you're going to electrocute yourself and die. And then they just leave them there for like days. So, these people were desperately trying to stay on that box, thinking that they're going to die. They stripped them naked and put them in big piles on top of each other. And we know what happened because of cell phones. They took pictures and sent to their family and friends, and it leaked. So the military immediately said they're bad people. And Zimbardo went to pretty much testify on their behalf because he said, these aren't bad people. They're just average people put into that role. People turn and become cruel to others. In fact, one of the women who were at the prison camp that took some of the pictures, she was a mother of 5 and head of the PTA and from our area. She was from Ridgely. So what he showed was, we're put in these roles and we have these attitudes about how we should act. And sometimes we just get caught up and we can become cruel to others. The question on the AP test I see most often is the fact that attitudes shape our actions in a particular social role. All right, so the next term with social thinking is cognitive dissonance. Dissonance means dislike, and we don't like it when our actions conflict with our thoughts or our attitudes. So, for example, if you decide you're going to go on a diet and you're going to be healthy, let's say after the new year, that's your New Year's resolution. So, for like a week, you do good. You go to the gym, you work out, you eat healthy, and then somebody brings in donuts and you can't resist. And so your attitude, your thoughts are you want to be healthy, but you eat a donut because you can't resist, and then you feel bad. So we don't like that. Smokers, people who smoke, they don't want to smoke because they know it's unhealthy, but they do it anyway. So they have this discontent or this dissonance. Okay, so the next term with social thinking, foot in the door. So if you want someone to do something for you, you start off with a small request and build to a larger request. You'll see a question on the AP test. It'll usually say something like, so-and-so went out smashing pumpkins with his friends, and that was kind of minor. And then the next night they asked this boy if he would throw eggs at cars, and he did. So they started off small and then went to something severe. Another question I see is a salesman comes to your house and asks if you'll buy something small, like a cleaning supply or something, carpet cleaner, I think it is. And you buy it, and then they come back a week later and ask you to buy the vacuum, and you've started off, you already bought something small, so then you end up doing something larger. So that's getting your foot in the door, building up. Large requests will be denied. So let's say you want to increase your curfew. So you say to your parents, I want to come home at 11:15 instead of 11. That way I can leave somewhere at 11 and be home. Well, it's 15 minutes. They're more likely to comply. And you can just keep building on that. That's your foot in the door. But if you say to them, I really don't like my 11 o'clock curfew, I'd like to make it 1 in the morning. That's too large of a request, so it will be denied. And that's called door in the face. Strange concept, but. All right, the last thing we looked at with social thinking is the bystander effect. So when I asked everybody in the class, if you saw someone in need, would you stop and help? You're all going to say, yes, of course. But research shows that whenever there's a lot of people around, we're very unlikely to stop and help someone. So if you saw somebody, on a busy street and the line on the street bleeding, most people just continue to pass by. And it's because of this diffusion of responsibility. People think, well, somebody else will get involved. So we keep walking. This is Kitty Genovese. She was one of the first people that kind of stunned the psychological world with this concept. She was a waitress working up in upstate New York. And she got off one night, walked home, and as she was approaching her apartment complex, it was a warm night, people's windows were up. She was attacked and she was stabbed several times, and she was screaming for help. They estimate that 30 some people heard her yell for help, and nobody called 911. So one guy yells out the window, hey, what's going on out there? So her attacker runs off. She drags herself up to the steps, bleeding, still yelling for help. Nobody called. Nobody came to help. He came back and finished her off on her doorstep. And it's just baffling that this happens, but they've reconducted over and over and over again studies, and people are very likely to just walk on by if there's a lot of people, thinking somebody else will stop and help. The opposite is true, though. If you see somebody in need and you're the only one around, then you are likely to stop and help. All right, so that's social thinking. The next thing we're going to look at is social influence. So how we're influenced by others. Pull that one up. All right, social influence. The first concept we looked at is known as the chameleon effect, and that is basically just conforming. We don't like to be different. We often just go along with the people around us and the group that we're in. So we're blending, and that's the chameleon effect. The need to conform is very, very strong, even at a young age. I said before, my young daughter, I took her to get her first backpack going to kindergarten. She couldn't decide because there's so many different varieties. She said, I don't want mine to be different. I'm going to have to consult my friends and then we'll come back. So even that need to conform, it is very strong at a very young age, and it continues throughout life. We just don't like to be that odd person out. So we look at two reasons why we have this need to conform. And the first one is called normative social influence. So this is that desire to fit in because we don't want to disappoint others, be different. We like to have that approval from others. We like to be accepted. So think of the word normative. We're fitting in, we're doing what others are doing around us because we want to be normal. We don't want to be unusual. We don't want people looking at us saying, what's wrong with them? So there were two different experiments that were conducted to just show this need to feel normal and fit in. So these support the normative social influence. The first one was the line study, Solomon Asch. So a common question on the AP test is associating Asch with the line experiment. So what he did was he had a group of actors sitting around a table, and then he had volunteers come in. They thought they were doing a research study about perception. So he shows them a standard line and he says, which of these three are most similar to the standard line? Well, that's obvious. It's two. So on the first couple slides, everybody gives the right answer. And then the volunteer at the end obviously gives the right answer. But on like the third time, all of those actors gave the wrong answer. They all said one. And then it gets to the volunteer and they're looking around like, are you kidding me? That's obviously wrong. But 2/3 of all the people, so you're looking at about 70% of all people involved, gave the wrong answer just to go along with the group because they didn't want to have to explain why they were different. That normative social influence, you just want to be accepted and fit in. You don't want to be different. So a student of Solomon Asch, Stanley Milgram, then did another experiment to look at conformity, but he wanted to look at obedience to an authority figure. Again, looking at, all the people involved in the concentration and death camps in Nazi Germany. Were they just bad people, or were they just following orders because they were told to do these things to others from an authority figure? Would average people, go to that extreme if they were told to do so by someone in an authoritarian position? So this was his study. This is an actor. He's the doctor or the physician in the lab coat here. This is an actor in the back. He's behind a wall that appears to be hooked up to an electric panel that administers electric shock. Right. This is the volunteer. They think that they're participating in a study on memory. And what they have to do is ask this guy back here a question. And if he gets the wrong answer, this volunteer has to administer electric shock. But I'm going to jump ahead. The voltage increases with each wrong answer. So it starts as a slight shock, 15 to 60 volts, but it goes all the way to 450 volts, which if it was real, it would kill the person. So Milgram said there's no way that people would go that far and harm another person like that. He was wrong. Again, 2/3 of all the people went all the way to 250 volts. If the man had really been getting electric shock, he would have died. So 70% followed blindly. This is blind obedience, just following this authoritarian figure's command. and would have, severely harmed the individual. This is a very unethical study. It caused the people the volunteers a lot of stress afterwards, thinking, "Oh my goodness, I would have killed that person." You would never be able to carry that out today. But here you can see almost 70%, it's like 67% went all the way to 450 volts. All right, the other reason or theory behind conformity is the informational social influence. So here we are conforming with others because we think they have more knowledge about a topic. We think that they know more than we do. So, oh, they know more than I do. I'll just go along with them. So with the line study, some gave this example. Some of them said, well, I gave the wrong answer because everybody else gave a different answer than what I thought. And I thought I misunderstood the question. And maybe they knew more about it than I did. So with normative, you're conforming to feel normal and fit in. Informational, you're conforming because you think others know more about the topic. All right, a few conditions that strengthen conformity. First of all, there has to be at least 3 people in the group. If it's just you and another person, then you may not conform. And the group has to be unanimous. If there's that one person that doesn't agree, then you have that other person to stand with you. And you have to admire the group. If it's a bunch of people that you don't care about, you're not going to worry about conforming. All right, so then we looked at some group influences. First of all, social facilitation is a good influence. Whenever others are around, we tend to work harder. Our performance is better. This is why you want home field advantage. When people are there watching, you just perform better. I was the advisor of the Diamonds, and I would watch them in practice, and I'm like, oh no, this performance is going to be terrible. But then they get out there in front of that audience, and the adrenaline's going, and everything would come together. So we just do better when people are watching. Social living is a negative group influence. Whenever we're in a group, we tend to just slack off. I don't like to give group work because you have a group assignment and there's always that one person who's the take charge. They do everything else and everybody else just slacks off and puts their name on it. All right, 2 other group influences. Group polarization first. Whenever you have a strong belief or opinion and you start discussing it with others, it gets stronger. So this is often seen with people in politics. They have this strong belief about a topic and they seek out others that support them and their belief just strengthens or polarizes. All right, groupthink. This is always bad. This is forgetting all common sense and just doing what the group says. And I gave you the example of Jim Jones up here. He was a cult leader in the 70s and his followers, were anti-government. They kind of lived in a commune in California and lived off the land. And, their whole message, he said he was a preacher, but it was pretty much anti-government. They didn't want to pay taxes. They didn't want to have to do anything with the government. So his congregation grew pretty large. So he moved them to Jonestown in South America, named after him. And he put a fence around the facility. Now, people joined voluntarily. It was mostly women and kids. And then the conditions were pretty unsanitary down there. And a lot of people wrote back to their family saying that they couldn't get out. He had, gates around the perimeter. And so they sent a Congressman, Leo Ryan, down to check it out. And he found that that was the case. So as he was leaving to go back, getting on the plane, Jim Jones had him killed on the tarmac, also a reporter. So now he knows they're going to come shut him down. So he goes to his congregation and he said, the only true way to be free from government is to, if you've ever heard the phrase, don't drink the Kool-Aid, this is why. He said, the only true way to be free of government oppression is to commit suicide. So they had cyanide poison in the Kool-Aid, the grape Kool-Aid, and they gave it to the kids first. And then they gave it to the women and children. Some people survived to tell the story. They got away. Jim Jones was a coward. Dying by poison is painful and slow, so he shot himself. But that's groupthink. These people just common sense went out the window, and they all lined up and drank the Kool-Aid, going against common sense because they thought it would be beneficial for the group, what the group thought was best. Right, the last term with social influence is de-individuation. So whenever you're going to remain anonymous, and you may get caught up in negative activity when you're in a big group. And this happens when there's looting after like a natural disaster. We've seen, over the riots, you see on the news, there's grandma going down the sidewalk with a cart full of TVs, because they think they're going to remain anonymous. They get caught up in this group activity. They're aroused and they lose all self-restraint. So de-individuation. All right, so let's see. The last part of this chapter is social relations. So this is how we relate to one another. So I started this off with this riddle. A father and son were in a car accident. The son was injured in the accident and needs surgery. The father took the son to the hospital. When the son goes into surgery, the surgeon looks down and says, I can't operate on him. He is my son. Who is the surgeon? It's not his father. And it's amazing in class that students cannot figure this out. I get maybe grandfather, I've had God, but it's actually his mother. You think it's my son, but it's not the father. It has to be the mother. But we don't think like that because we tend to think of a surgeon as a male. And this is known as a stereotype. A stereotype is a generalized belief about a group of people. A stereotype can be good or bad. We associate police officers with donuts. We associate Asians with being good at math. That's not bad. It's an overgeneralized belief. If that belief turns negative, that is a prejudice.
You are currently the only person in this conference.
So if it becomes negative, then that is a prejudiced attitude. If we take action on that negative attitude, that then is discrimination. Okay, so discrimination. So if you don't hire someone based on their race or ethnicity or gender, that is taking action. Okay, so a few theories behind prejudice. First of all, the in-group theory. So this is that us versus them mentality. Whenever we belong to a group, we favor that group and we dislike others who are not in our group. This might happen with sports teams sometimes. The football players, they favor each other and they don't like the soccer players and vice versa. Jane Elliott was a school teacher in Riceville, Iowa, and she showed this theory pretty well. After the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., she wanted to have her students understand what it would be like to experience discrimination. But she was in a community where everyone was basically a farming community, white Protestant. So she said, she thought that she would come in one day and have these collars. And she put them on the brown-eyed kids. And she tells the blue-eyed kids, you all are smarter than brown-eyed kids. Brown-eyed kids, they're not as good. And you shouldn't play with them. And they put collars on the brown-eyed kids to identify them from a distance. And then the blue-eyed kids were given all these privileges. They were allowed extra food, extra recess time. They were just told they were better. And immediately, those blue-eyed children started discriminating against the brown-eyed kids. They fought with them. They called them names. One brown-eyed student answers a question wrong, and one of the blue-eyed students said, well, you know why? They have brown eyes. So she showed that us versus them mentality in just a couple hours. Next day, she came in and did the opposite. She told the brown-eyed students that they were better than the blue-eyed students, and immediately they started targeting and discriminating against the blue-eyed students. So again, that's Jane Elliott. All right, second explanation behind prejudice is scapegoat theory. This is when you're down and out, down on your luck, you find a group of people to blame for your anger. A lot of times people who are unemployed will blame immigrants, and then they dislike immigrants. The final solution here in Nazi Germany takes that to the extreme. After World War One, Germany was pretty much blamed for World War One, and they had to pay huge reparations. So they were dirt poor people in Germany. They were malnourished. They were just really, really down on their luck. But there was one group of people who owned businesses and were wealthy, and that was the Jewish population. So that led to anger in the German people, which eventually caused, the discrimination that occurred there in Nazi Germany. That was their scapegoat. Just world phenomenon. This is the idea that we tend to blame people who are victims because we think they deserved what they got. It was justified. So if you're walking down the city street late at night and you get mugged, we don't like to think that we're helpless and there's victims out there. So they would just say, well, that was stupid of them. They got what they deserve. So that the world is just world phenomenon. All right. So the next thing we looked at, which is a positive thing, is altruism. This is doing a good deed for others. Why do we do nice things for others? So 3 theories behind that. One, it's evolutionary. Way back when communities were forming, when people worked together and did things for one another, communities thrived. If you lived out by yourself, it would have been difficult to be prosperous. Social responsibility norm. This is the idea that if someone seems helpless or dependent upon us, then we're more likely to do something nice for them. So if somebody is approaching the door in the morning and it's cold and you're trying to get in, you're more likely to stand there and hold the door if they're on crutches or need assistance in some way. Social exchange theory just simply says that there really isn't any good deeds. Everything we do is to benefit ourselves. So, for example, if you see a homeless person and you give them money or food, you're doing it because you felt bad. You walk by and you think, oh, and you feel bad. You give them something and then you feel better. So it's to maximize your own benefit. All right, this is pretty simple. Frustration, aggression principle. You're more likely to be frustrated, or you're more likely to be aggressive when you're frustrated. So an example on the AP test is often so-and-so's mad at his dad, and he lets all the air out of his tires. Or there's another question, after playing a tough basketball game, you lost to an away team, so you trashed their locker room. So you become aggressive when you're frustrated. 5 factors of attraction. All right, the first is proximity. The more we're around somebody, the more attracted we feel to them. So that's why long distance relationships don't work. And sometimes this is called the mere exposure effect. The more we're exposed to people or even items, the more you see commercials of certain things on TV, the more likely you are to want to buy them. So proximity. We're more likely to be attracted to someone that we have something in common with. We like people who share our same interests. Reciprocal liking. We're more likely to like someone who likes us. That eliminates that rejection fear. Someone likes you, you're like, oh, I might like them too. The next one's conditioning, classical conditioning or association. So if you like chocolate and somebody brings you chocolate every day, you might start to associate chocolate with that person and start liking that person. And sometimes we're just physically attracted to one another. So those are the 5 factors of attraction. We just like how someone looks. Last thing I don't have on here is the 2 types of love. First of all, passionate love is that new love that you feel when you start dating someone, where you're just so absorbed in that person you can't get away. But after that, that settles into what's called companionate or compassionate love. And it's a deeper understanding and appreciation for one another. It's not just that physical attraction. And a lot of people don't like that. When that passion fades over time, a lot of people end up breaking up in their relationship because they like that newness. But it's a deeper love. All right, so that finishes off everything for social psych. Again, I recommend that you go and answer some of the questions in the workbook, and let me know if you have any questions. All right. Have a good evening.